So long as he's thinking Malaysian and he's doing things meant for building Malaysia as what?
Politically, economically, even socially, when we think of Malaysia, we think as if Malaya represents Malaysia.
From 17 to 18, we include Tun Hussein on because he essentially continued rather policies. We had great improvement.
When we talk about the youth, I feel that it's not fair to put the blame on them because they are young, right? So they are looking for guidance. Hello everyone, I'm Atira Minuddin and you are watching From Malaya to Malaysia 60 Years podcast. This is a special edition for Sina Daily's podcast for the month of Merdeka and also Hari Malaysia. And today in this episode, we will be diving into the political and economic motivations of the formation of Malaysia since it already been 60 years. And from Malaya to Malaysia, what happened prior to the establishment and how has it been for the past 60 years. And I'm not going to be the one to explain it to you about what happened for the past 60 years. I am joined with two honorable guests. On my very right, we have International Islamic University Malaysia Political Science Head Department, Dr Syaza Shukri. Hi, Doctor. Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show. And on my far right, we have University Malaya Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Asia Europe Institute, Prof Rajah Rasiah. How are you, Prof?
Not too bad.
Not too bad. Thank you so much for taking time to come to join our podcast today. And we're just going to dive into the conversation. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Syaza.
Okay.
We want to know, it's been 60 years. The formation of Malaysia was in 1963. 60 years is a long time. 6 years, right?
Yeah.
So we want to know what were the main political motivations behind the formation of Malaysia. Perhaps our viewers might not fully understand what happened there.
Okay, maybe I'll add a disclaimer first, right? I'm not a historian, so my answer might be patchy here and there when it comes to the history. But in general, since I'm a political scientist, I can speak from that perspective. When we talk about geopolitics, right? The strength of a nation, a country, relies on various factors. And one of it is the size, territory, resources, population. So back in the day, 60 years ago, as you pointed out, we are looking at expanding Malaya to become this greater nation, Malaysia, so that we become a bigger country in Southeast Asia, since we have Indonesia down south, which is obviously a larger country, larger nation, so that we can bring in the Borneo states of Sabah and Sarawak together with Singapore. Then we can be a force in Southeast Asia. So that was the thinking behind it. But then also there's the political aspect, since you asked of it. There's the racial aspect as well.
Okay.
That when we bring in Singapore, then there will be an influx of Chinese Malaysians at the time, right? So to balance that out, that was the thinking of bringing in Sabah and Sarawak. And then we create this whole term of Bumiputra.
Yeah.
So I'll start there first.
Okay. And how was the reaction from the politicians and politicans in the process of the formation? Because it's a big process. It's combining a few territories into one, right? How was it?
So they went about going for referendums, mistaken, right? Going to the ground, asking the people what are their feelings. Would they be okay? Would they agree to form Malaysia, right? To join Malaya, to form Malaysia. So there's a lot of what shall I say, debates going on right now about what happened at the time, because if we remember our history textbook, obviously it was positive, right? And that positive response that led to the formation of Malaysia. But now a lot of historians are saying, well, the referendums did not reach the mass population that we wanted, that we hoped for. So the voices, the answers that said yes to the referendum were actually a minority, and they took that and went ahead with the formation of Malaysia. So from here we see, you used the politically, right? So this is the politicking that went ahead. It feels that there's always this, the end is always to form Malaysia. And they're going to find justifications for it. And they did during doing this referendums that I mentioned, they were able to find those justification that allow Malaysia to be born.
Despite arguments saying otherwise.
Yes, and now we're finding more information on that, and I guess we're going to discuss this later on, that we after 60 years and some hiccups here and there in Malaysia. So there's more of these voices that saying, was it done above board really, the nation of Malaysia? So,
I know that you mentioned that, Doctor. Prof, I wanted to ask you, the formation of Malaysia, it's not simply combining territories. It's not simply combining an island, two different parts of the world to join as a country. It's also discussion on economic growth would be there, the resources, the future developments, and what were the expectations for economic growth and development at the time, Prof? Could you explain?
I think we are taking a position in relation to the specific year, the Malaysia Agreement, 1963. One is to put into context too. We had confrontation at that time. Although, of course, those who have not seen from the vantage point of Sukarno, they will take the position that, these guys were greedy for territories, including acquiring Natuna, which is more northerly latitude-wise than even Kelantan. It's a bigger island than even Penang, Timor. Now, one has to see that his time it was really liberating Malaysia, forming Nusantara, 1945, when he declared that is the president, independent. The difference they had is they didn't have royalty then. Basically destroyed by the Dutch, who occupied them at that time. Now, in the case of Malaysia, I think the MA63 came up with a position that Sarawak, Sabah, Indonesia, in Singapore, they will enjoy similar status as Peninsular Malaysia. That's the main bone of argument, contention that had not been honored. They have been, Singapore, of course, left in 1965. The others have been annexed as territories, provinces. That's the main bone of contention. My own feeling is why these states chose to join. I think it's a lot to do with they were British colony. When Raffles came there and feared the Germans might take over these states, ended up writing to the King of England to see that it's taken over by the British. Now, I think that at that time, I take the same view as her. I don't think there was much discourse right to the ground. If you know this book, The Malay Labourer by Zabawi Ibrahim, one of my mentors, although he wanted me to be a sociologist, and now he actually makes the point. Most of the accounts we read are accounts from the top, either by the royalty or the bourgeoisie, not from the bottom. So he's narrating the history of workers from the Malay labourer. I think that's the unique way of presenting. So if you're looking at whether there was really a referendum involving everybody, I doubt there really was. And the second one, your more targeted question to me, I think 63, the focus wasn't so much, even though we had new-part substitution from 1958, at the first year after the Pioneer Industry Ordinance. And then, of course, the economy wasn't really growing very much at that time. There was a descent all over, and then, of course, there was no attempt to bring these people together. So the focus then, after the May 13 crisis, was to see how you can have a plural Malaysia born. These are some of the things we are missing now, because at that time, I do not think Tun Razak and Tun Dr. Ismail wanted to see Singapore.
No one.
Knowing them, they are really not racist at all, in my mind, completely no. They wanted to see, if you look at this is in a book that I edited with my mentor, Tan Sri Kamal Saleh, Traveling Development, revisiting Razak's role in Malaysia's economic progress, came out in 2019, and we are doing another one with Iwan Razak's son there, imagining Malaysia's future through Razak's lenses. Now, the point is, he quite clearly to me meant that by those 20 years, we will have a Malaysia that's plural, consistent with our Rukun Negara. He led the formation of Rukun Negara. Little of that is visible. So my more impressions are that if only that vision had continued, I think we could have achieved a lot more than what we did. we didn't do well. We have done way better than many countries.
Okay.
But surely we have not reached the heights of Korea, Taiwan, or with Singapore. So my feeling is the focus then, and it's quite clear that he was concerned about poverty in rural areas. He became father of rural development, but he was not, in that sense, fixated on only that.
Yeah.
And remember that when Lim Chong Yu joined Gerakan 2, Gerakan in, it was Rajah presided over it, and he allowed a whole lot of things suggesting that he was not a polarizing figure.
Yeah.
He wasn't. And the NEP elements were, one, elevation of poverty, the two wrong. Second one, removing the ethnic identification of occupations. The only problem, government didn't take care of civil service, which became dominated in one particular ethnic group. So my problem is not Rajah himself.
Yeah.
And to me, the idea of 30% equity or that, I do not think it was really driven. That's why it came with the 1975. 1975 when they imposed those kinds of things. A year before Tun Razak died, he was already very ill before that. And he made great achievements, even though we don't remember Tun Razak as Prime Minister who orchestrated from such divisions, from such low levels of productivity, facing the poor, largely the Malays, by having these parastatals develop to the extent of becoming role models, Felda, Pelgrau, Vista, Majulita too. If you estimated productivity growth from 70 to 18, we include Tun Hussein because he essentially continued rather policies. We had great improvement, productivity growth. He even actively saw that people parastatal didn't work very well. He changed the leader, and they preferred a Malaysian. And when there were Malaysians, he preferred a Malaysian. So my own feeling is that sort of assessment, that sort of focus, gradually disappeared after that. So if we talk about the early part of it, although of course he didn't dabble so much on Sarawak and Sabah, perhaps for this formative years, but there were outstanding things he had done to suggest that the kind of thinking he had was the thinking of not just about the country simply growing, but we also addressed the problem, the plight of the poor.
Yeah.
The last point there I would like to mention is it was Rajah who introduced Zopfat, Zolo, peace, friendship, and neutrality. And in that one, the concept of having ASEAN working together quite obviously means that he was concerned about the big powers. He didn't want to join them. Likewise, he was here concerned about the poor. But because of the circumstances in 1969, he wanted that sort of alignment until the 20 years. But since then, it's become highly polarized. So my own feeling, the starting was good, except that
it got gradually,
See, the self-sufficiency rate for rice highest during this time. 1976, we achieved 87%. It's 69% now. It's 93% in Taiwan. I think if we had been around, we would have got
a higher number. Sufficient. And the fact that Prof mentioned about plural Malaysia and in the merger, the discussion on national identity and citizenship were definitely a topic of discussion. And Dr. Syaza, how does the formation influence political integration and unity among the member of states? Because, like you said, plural Malaysia was part of the plan in the formation, and you see it gradually over the years, it kind of disappeared. What do you think of the influence of the political integration?
Yes, that's a very difficult and handy question, I would say. Right. So I think when Malaysia was formed, there was this idea to make Malaysia more like a plural society, especially focusing on integration of different groups of people across occupation, especially because we want to eradicate poverty, etc. Having said that, at the highest level, I still think there is still this understanding that we can't avoid, not that we can't avoid, that there's no will to avoid racial politics in the country. What I'm trying to say is that politics in Malaysia since then until now is still divided along racial lines. So we never...
famous card to use in the country.
So, and I mentioned earlier in your first question, I mentioned about the term Bumiputra, right? The term Bumiputra was shall I say, created post Malaysia. It was not there during Malaya's time. It became this political term, whereby we include the Malays and the natives of Sabah and Sarawak, because we want to create this larger majority group instead of Malays, which were not the majority. In fact, if I may say, right before Malaya got independence, I can't remember the year, 1940s, I guess, Malays were actually a slight minority in the country, in Malaya.
Yeah.
So when we bring in Sabah and Sarawak, when you bring in the natives, then we create this Bumiputra group. It became a larger group. And politically, the political leaders, they need it. They need it for their own political survival. And we were not able to cross, what shall I say, that finishing line of eradicating politics along racial lines and come together as one until today. So Prof mentioned about Gerakan coming into Barisan Nasional, right, post 1969 under Razak. But again, if you remember, Barisan Nasional was created 1971, if I'm not mistaken, with all of these parties combined under one coalition, but they are still racial-based parties, right? It's not like suddenly Gerakan claims to be a multiracial party. So do a lot of parties today, but we can still see the dominance of certain parties, certain ethnicities in each parties. So the creation of a united plural Malaysia, I think there's a long way to go still, especially now, I think, where I don't think I should say the word regressing, but that's how I see it, regressing a bit. So it's adding on to years where we can build this united Malaysia together. So that's how it is.
I understand your point of view. Given the situation that we are in for the past 5-6 years, the political instability that we have witnessed over the years, I understand your point of view, and the fact that you mentioned earlier as well that there are still people who are arguing about the formation of Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore. And do you think this question is dedicated to Prof and Dr Syaza? Do you think these people who are arguing, do you think they feel neglected even after 60 years? Do you think that's where the argument comes from?
Sure. Yes. The short answer is yes. A lot of talks, especially in Sabah and Sarawak, is no longer self-reliance, self-sufficiency, is independence, right? If we look at the Sarawak state elections, what was it, 2022? When 21?
Yeah.
During the pandemic. It was during the pandemic. That was their main discourse, that it was about independence, or at least more autonomy. They're talking about MA63, that beyond that, because there's this sense of frustration that, just like Prof mentioned, that this is like an annexation, that what do we get from this joining Malaya to form Malaysia? It promises development, but at the end of the day, Sabah is the poorest or the second poorest state in the whole of the country. Sarawak is doing better, but still
a lot of work to do.
Yeah, that's true. And they feel like they could do better on their own, especially when they look at our neighbor down south. They say, Singapore left.
Yeah.
And look at it now. So there's a lot of this discourse going on until today. Did we do the right thing when we joined Malaya?
Yeah. And Prof?
Yeah, well, one would like to look at options, whether we are concerned about Malaysia and Malaysians, or rather specific groups or parties lead Malaysia's leadership and premiership take before many other things, to suggest that they want to remain in roads. But let's look at politically how these things manifested. Sabah, for a while, it appeared that UMNO made inroads. UMNO made inroads, but of course, the current Prime Minister was quite instrumental in under Tun Mahathir's premiership. But it didn't look like there was that much of traction with Sarawak. Right from the beginning, they said no. Now, likewise, PAS made many attempts to get that. They also never succeeded. So, what is clear now, especially over the last few elections, both states have rejected race and religion as a basis of government. So besides, the Muslims are not a majority in both states. In Sarawak, it will be the Ibarans and the Chinese. Out there in Sabah, it's the Pereira. So my feeling is we should have had that sort of autonomy right from the beginning with MA63. In fact, the more serious people, I do not think, are keen on becoming independent. Hence, the bargaining instrument they use. But that sort of autonomy should be given as how Aceh has since Suharto fell. Remember that the Suharto's government, very different from Sukarno when he was killed, including his generals, the Simatupang brothers. Now, Suharto's government built a pribumi. So the pribumi notion had already started there, Abu Rahim. And his notion included whenever there was a crisis, API was sent. We say the Chinese are behind it, Angkatan Bersenjata Republic Indonesia. So what I see is that has now almost completely vanished, although there are pockets of it emerging here and there, after Suharto fell in 1999 when Hamoko, the speaker, asked him to resign, Habibie to go work. But the point I'm trying to make is, if leaders here were concerned the way I thought Rajah did, or even Pusinon, except that he was quite a passive guy, I think we wouldn't have had come to this sort of problem. And let governance, military control and so on, we take charge of it down here, but governance be in their hands. If that had been done, that's fine. So one of the reasons why I hear, again, these are books I'm not sure if you read, Joe Summer, or even James Chin. These guys make the point that it's time to get away from Peninsula because they are into politics that disastrous dangerous for us. That is race and religion. In fact, I remember Baginda Sultan Perak once launching a book. I was sitting there listening. He says, our politicians are great in the sense that they gave the colonialists for dividing us by race. But they not only perfected taking that race, but also added religion to it. So my own feeling is, if we are really concerned about the people rather than just winning elections, I think that should be defined in that. Again, I'm not a guy who feels that I'm right. This is what I think. And because you cannot do away with A or B, although some people say eventually this is very much the origin of species. The good one will win. I'm not a believer in that. What here I see is, if we are really concerned about the country, where we want to build trust, we want to build cooperation, that we are one, then the attitude, orientation will be different. But if we are taking this view, we want to be there, what is the strategy best able to get us there, then that might be in evolution with what I think will.
Yes. So do you think the politicians and Malaysian leaders done well to unite East and West Malaysia?
I think the cries from, it's not that I think that the states of Sarawak and Sabah are led by really competent leaders. Maybe they are, but they use this as a bashing,
as a tool to
bashing point to build support for themselves. We are what we are now because of the peninsula. Because it's just like when you make an argument, you have to understand in 1970, the per capita income of Penang was more or less the same as Kelantan. Both were underdeveloped regions. If you look at the second Malaysia plan, if you look at it. Now, look at the gap built up. Unless, of course, you feel there's another friend, if we end up supporting inequality, it's more difficult to go to heaven. The statement that even Rumi mentions that. But I think that's not how one should conceive it. In the sense that it's just like Marxist socialism didn't take off because that element, including the gap that there's no religion there, has meant that wherever it went, except for China, which again introduced marketization within a socialist structure, it failed in Russia. In fact, Lenin recognized that, except that Stalin had become too powerful, that productivity is down. People, the ordinary people, are living poor. So my own feeling is, it's a question of leadership.
Yeah.
But the leadership too can be constrained by certain leaders. For example, I'm not one who takes the view that there's complete rejection of army. Out of 16 seats they contested in this building, they won 14. And Tomat seems like he's a lead guy. He's carried a clean image. I'm not sure whether he really is. But that's a case in point. If that is indeed true,
Yeah.
the Bismillah only borders Selangor.
Yeah.
Now, how could they win 14 out of 16 there and got decimated elsewhere?
Yeah.
So I think all those things still count.
Okay. So there are multiple factors that would play a role in this whole thing, right? And Dr. Syaza, do you think nowadays Malaysians, do they realize or appreciate the significance of the formation of Malaysia over the years?
So I'll relate this with your earlier question on the unity of East and West Malaysia. Again, the short answer to both is no, unfortunately. I see that there's little appreciation, as you put it, that Malaysia is a different species than Malaya. But I guess I can speak on the peninsular side, right? Because I'm from here, I grew up from here. It's only fair for me to speak from this side. The focus has always been on Malaya as the basis of the formation of Malaysia, which is not true, right? Malaysia is formed among these 4 different entities. Malaya is just one of it. So when the focus has always been on Malaya in all parts, politically, economically, even socially, when we think of Malaysia, we think as if Malaya represents Malaysia, which is again untrue, but this is how we see it. So back to your question on the unity of West and East Malaysia. So this is why I feel we have failed. Of course, to put the blame on the leadership, I think it's fair, because they should have done more. And they should have done more to educate the people that, this is what Malaysia is, and there are more than just the 3 main races that we think about. We think of Malaysia, Malay, Chinese, Indians. That's not true. There are more in Sabah and Sarawak. I doubt some people know that Muslims are not majority over there, because they still think of Malaysia as a Muslim majority country. Well, Malaya is, but you need to expand your view of Malaysia to include Sabah and Sarawak. So I think this is where there's frustration on their part, and I said just now, it's fair for them to feel this way. They feel, the word that's always been used, anak tiri, right?
Yeah.
They're not really seen as equal. Yeah, they're the anak tiri kan. Of course, other states in Malaya also feel that way. So this has created this huge roadblock for us to really come together and really feel as one, as truly Malaysian. So 60 years later, I think we have failed here.
Do you think it's going to get worse from here?
Well,
if the youngsters perhaps they don't read or they don't do research on the Malaysia's history. So do you think in the future would it get worse?
So I'm afraid to say either or, because if I think about, like I mentioned earlier, the discourse surrounding the Sarawak state election, it looks like it's going to become worse, in the sense that they are also holding on to their Bornean identity, and the Malayan side are holding on to the Malayan identity. Like, there's no bridge here.
Yeah.
There's no overlapping identity. But I guess I still have faith, because when we talk about the youth, I feel that it's not fair to put the blame on them, because they're young, right? So they are looking for guidance. So this is where the politicians come in.
Yeah,
Education comes in.
History lessons.
Exactly. So history lessons talk about both sides fairly, right? Not just on Malayan history. 1957 is a good start, but it is, like I said earlier, Malaya is
equally important.
Exactly. It should be more important, because they're talking about Malaysia, not Malaya. So yes, education, I think, is the most important here. We can't talk about those that have graduated. So I don't want to say that there's a lost cause. Like, okay, these are those, the future of Malaysia. But let's talk about the future ones. Yeah, what we call Generation Alpha, I guess now. They are the ones in school.
You're right.
So they are the ones in school. So let's talk to them. Let's educate them well. Especially, and that's the thing, when we talk about history education, we know how our You see stuff. This is sejarah is boring. Right? They're not interested in sejarah. So do something about it, because we're talking here about the future of our nation, the fabric of our nation.
The patriotism, you said every Malaysian.
You can't put it.
It's worrying.
It is, and you can't put it. How do I put it? Because we always focus on STEM subjects, which is fine, but we need to work on the humanities side, right? We are talking about uniting Malaysians. What is the point of a developed economy if societies like we're not united, we're all over the place? So put a lot of emphasis, I think, in sejarah as a subject.
There's no point of having, like you said, a good first-class country, but the society itself is ruined. People just simply hate each other, throwing harsh words at each other, even politicians, right? And not to forget, the formation of Malaysia, not just about Sabah and Sarawak. Singapore was part of the formation, which I think people sometimes don't really say it. People always say Sabah Sarawak is actually including Singapore. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Singapore, they celebrate their Independence Day in August, which is August 9. They say it would be 58 years. And Prof. Rajah, what was happening during the separation, if you could give us like a brief explanation, and what was the political point of view and the economic standpoint? Because it happened not just 2 years after the formation of Malaysia in 1963. Could you explain a little bit, Prof?
I think it happened during the premiership of Tunku Abdul Rahman, when he allowed Singapore to become independent. Right? So, but one has to also recognize that Premier Lee Kuan Yew had tremendous support from the UK in dealing with a whole lot of issues. So I'm not sure what happened in the background of such a sedition. But my own feeling is Lee Kuan Yew's position. In fact, I had the opportunity of having met Tunku Abdul Rahman when he was living Dalam McAllister over there, because I, as an ESCO member of the academic staff of the USM, picked up when I was on his way to the US. He wanted to sit to Tunku, and he explained why. He said that he wanted the Malaysia Malaysia. He wanted the rules to be the same, rather than the position that they need to have this privileged position of the trust, largely because the argument then with Tunku and Tun Radha was not one of the kind that Malays must be given the special position, even though Islam and Malays have a special recognition there, royalty even higher, but in terms of citizenship, their position was equal. Now, what I thought in the deliberation with him, he spoke to me in impeccable English with a local accent. I think the outstanding thing he saw, I could see, is he was an intellectual with a profound mind, and I feel that the salvation of Singapore was not something he liked as such, but given the context that, he being a Democrat in many ways, Radha was opposed to that view. He allowed Singapore to go, to let this super brain to do. But at the time, this is documented rather than me investing my time to infiltrate through clandestine means to see if indeed that was his position. But I think Lee Kuan Yew was not happy he left alone. But it contradicts, that's why I raised this point. It contradicts because on the one hand, you want this, and if you want this, Tunku's point is, yeah, go do it yourself over there. And then he says, if you look at his socialism that works, he says, a small state left behind, we were really worried, suggesting that would have preferred to be within Malaysia. So I don't know, because these two may contradict.
Yeah.
But again, I grew up in a Malay village. I was stabbed. I was in hospital when I was supposed to be a standard 1. I only went to standard 2. Until standard 6, I had no books, nothing. Certain things happened to me. I had certain talent and so on. Then I went to Form 1. I'm number 10 of 13 siblings. Now, I was running around with all these Malay kids in a location close to Kampung Banjar in Teluk Intan. I never saw an element of racism in my mind. It's quite clear to me. Even when I went to do my first degree in USM, of course, you'll find cliques of Indians, cliques of Malays, cliques. For some reason, whether it's the mosque, they did. But I never saw an element of a racist view there. I never felt this.
It's never an issue.
Yeah. So, but it has become. I don't know whether this is universal there. My best friends are not Indians. Though I tell even a lot of Fraukens are. In fact, the Pemandu Minister Idris Jalla is organizing a dinner to bring back all my Frauken friends in his house in October. Now, my feeling is it is this kind of thing that we should promote. What is good there, you take it out and amplify it, because that builds Malaysia. Not ones that only sees that we become the important person in build this sort of erotic discourse. And I could also say the same thing, having that Islamic philosophy as one of my elective courses, that why aren't we going back not to reproduce, but to look at the Nilan and Islam when Ibn Rida, Ibn Sinar and so on, the greatness of science that they promoted. In fact, I used all this when I gave the Mustafa lecture in Tehran, by ceremony lecture. The point I'm trying to make here is when you have leaders who are willing to do that because they love the country more than themselves, then Malaysia will progress. I feel that we still have an opportunity to move in that direction, but it all depends on how. It has to be brought to the masses too, that we are the same. To have this logic that it is a bit like how the Portuguese and the Spanish, when they in the age of conquest, they used the term infidel, kafir munkafir. And to kill an infidel was okay. So all over the world, they were killing the Muslims in Africa, Latin America, they did all that they did in the name of God too. I think if we go in that direction, but that took place how many centuries ago? At this time.
But the pace at the rate that we're going, it's a bit, it's 60 years, but still here we are having the same discussion even after 60 years of the separation and the racial issue. It's a bit slow, no?
Absolutely. I think they should bring this to the masses, give them enough effort. Or let them do that. If it means the masses want a particular government, after knowing everything, that's okay, because that's their choice. It's a bit like the notion of inclusivity, in my mind, started when Paulo Freire and Peter Virgil said that, and Tun Mahdi mentioned that he doesn't want the Fernand up there in the hills having a life expectancy of 40, he wants progress. Now, if you take these guys, Bolsonaro included, the guy who was president of Brazil just before Lula got re-elected again. He was having this large clearing of land in the Amazon. Natives, if you clear more land, landslides, floods, flash floods, and the animals they look for disappear, hunting and gathering essentially what they do. Because he said the life expectancy is 40, the so-called happiest country in the world now is Bhutan. Life expectancy is 40. Now, if they still desire to do that, I think you should not. It's like the people in Brazil, they have never been there. That's why they make the point. Feelings that are real for those who are experiencing it. Bayangkan seorang sakit perut. Me watching, it's not the same. And what more, you don't even watch, you don't even know what they do over there. So my feeling is we need to do this sort of conscientization. And expose them to all this. Let them be there, because in the end, it should be their choice stick. I think to get there, those who believe in this notion of building trust, in this notion of cooperation, in having a society that is one Malaysia, we're talking about Malaysia Malaysia, Malaya, she said. I think that at least the government in power seems to take that federal government, not the state government, to do a more proactive play a more proactive role to see that option, that exposure is that. Let the people do that.
I'd like to add something. Sometimes people point out that people compare Malaysia to the US, right? And they say, look, after 200 years, it took them for them to have their first black president. And then they say, Malaysia's only 60, so we're relatively a baby. So we will get there eventually, but I feel 140 years is a long time.
My feeling.
But that's the thing. I feel that we should not. We should not use that as the argument that we're only 60, we are still with another 100 years. No, we are at a different point in time. You're comparing to America that gained independence in 1776. We got it 200 years later. It's not an apple and apple comparison. So with all that, the information that we have, like Prof said, we now know more.
Yeah.
So I think we should make that leap. We should not wait for another 50 years, another 60 years. We should do something now. So there is hope, but a lot of political will.
Yeah, but still, my question is, was Obama got his Nobel Prize for Peace as he was elected, not exposed to retirement. For whatever reason, that's for Nobel Prize committee to do. But I think my own feeling, my own take is the color of a person as Prime Minister doesn't matter. It's just like there is a huge hue and tie that women are not well represented. And the logic behind it, if you put this many women there, they will take care of female interests. I don't believe that's the case. More often than not, they take care of their own interests. Likewise, every an Indian president, Prime Minister, I don't think that should be the goal. I have no problem. To me, it's perfect to have a Malay all the time as Prime Minister. What's wrong with that? So long as he's thinking Malaysian and he's doing things meant for building Malaysia as what?
As you mentioned, federal government plays a big role to be proactive, to unite Malaysians, right? And just before we end the podcast, my last question is, that is a very important point. The federal government plays a big role being proactive to bring Malaysians together. So, we're going to start with you, Dr. Syaza. What do you think we can hope for Malaysia for the next 60 years to come?
What we can hope for, yeah?
Yeah.
I think we should hope for a better Malaysia. I like how Prof mentioned earlier about, comparing us with South Korea and whatnot. I always remind my students that back then we were ahead of South Korea, right?
Yeah, we were. How can we be ahead of them again?
How? That's the question that we have to figure out. And I think we should remember, just like we discussed earlier, that we should not focus just on economic development, right? We're talking about 60 years from now. Let's figure out how to bring all of us together again. What Prof described earlier about his childhood sounds very nice, but unfortunately, I don't think I experienced that. I'm not sure about you.
My childhood was very cliquish. The Malays.
Like we have Chinese and Indian neighbors, but sometimes we don't mix.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where we went wrong there. A lot of people have put the blame on our school system, etc. So we can see there are a lot of things here to fix. So it's not one thing. We should not just focus on the economy, but across the board, like we were talking about, like education, bringing people together. All of these things play a role. That 60 years from now, maybe we can have a better Malaysia, a more united one, together with Sabah and Sarawak.
Perhaps maybe in politics should stop playing the race card as well. That would contribute.
Proud countries is not allowed. Even in sports, if you seen as having a racist joke, it'll be fine. I from secondary school, I was in the top class, and typically I'm not appreciative, but in a missionary school, Holy Methodist, which was ACS before, you're talking about 80% of the students in the top class being Chinese, and then 15% Malays and 5% said Indians. We are back. They suddenly saw me in the newspapers. We now regularly meet. I don't see any element of racism today. Right now, was communicating a lot about a number of things on what happens in Terengganu and Kelantan. We have never had any element, although of course every year we go to their house, because that sort of visits there because of different festivals. In fact, I'm a guy who loves to eat Malay food. That's what I did earlier. But my own feeling is, it's a question of whether that's what you want to carry. If it means that's what you need to do, build a Malaysia that on. Korea, Taiwan don't have that problem. Actually, people don't realize the Chinese who went there, the Kuomintang, when they started by the CCP, Chiang Kai-shek, they had their own local Polynesians, but that didn't become the basis of their governance. So we are also a room of Polynesian group, the Malays, or even the others who don't call themselves Malays, because in Perak we have the Mandaling, the Batak, also. See, my feeling is, it's a question of what you value. Korea's per capita income until 1979 was lower than Malaysia's. It's more than 3 times now, I think. They have a population over 50 million. Ours is 33.5 million. Taiwan, 36 point something million. It's because the World Bank doesn't carry data so much, but it's also around close to what the Koreans do. So my feeling is, if you are valuing those things, and the level of democracy there is high, that's why they don't want to be part of China. It's not a question of don't want China.
Yeah.
They are worried about losing that sort of democracy. So my own feeling is, you need leaders who can be dynamic, push this across. It's just like Sukarno managed.
Yeah.
He was a great speaker. Like Helmut Kohl managed to integrate these two Germanys when they had to sacrifice a lot to get East Germany there. Much poorer. Well, we need that sort of. I thought they had that ability, but perhaps didn't do it.
The new prime minister then.
The current prime minister, you're hoping it.
Future prime minister, maybe, or no, because the next 60 years, there's another 6 decades.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know if I'm still going to be here all 3 of us years, yeah, but we can be hopeful for a better Malaysia in the future, maybe in the next 5 years or so. I can always expect a better future Malaysians, the youngsters, all generations of Malaysians. And that concludes our discussion today for our podcast From Malaya to Malaysia 60 Years podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Syaza from International Islamic University Malaysia, Political Science Head Department. And thank you, Prof. Rajah Rasiah, from University Malaya, Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Asia Europe Institute. Thank you so much for having this discussion with me. It's a very fruitful conversation, and I hope our audience, our viewers and listeners enjoy this conversation. And if you missed out this episode, our previous episodes, you can watch it on our YouTube channel, Sinar Daily, and our website, www.sinardaily.my. And make sure to follow all of our social media platforms to get the latest news and current affairs in the country, and also other exclusive interviews. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Atira Amnuddin. See you guys next time. You've just watched From Malaya to Malaysia's 60 Years podcast special, a campaign collaboration between Sinar Daily, Boal Studio and Reka Sounds. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and make sure to follow and subscribe Sinar Daily's social media platform, Sinar Daily MY, for more. I'm Atira Amnuddin. Thank you for watching.